Cameron Brandt, Director of Research at EPFR Global, is with us now. Cameron, great to have you in. Let me start right there. Do you concur with that view that working Americans are going to have a great 2026? Because now we're coming out of that dark tunnel, right? The no data tunnel. And we'll get a better sense of what the jobs market is looking like, what's happening with the economy. What's the sense when you're looking at flows that have been, the way they've been shifting in the absence of this data? What does that tell you?
Well, in the absence of data, people have hung on to the technology, artificial intelligence story. Basically, and as you know, we look at this from the mutual fund flows perspective. We've seen an acceleration of flows into technology sector funds and dedicated AI funds during both of the bouts of recent turbulence triggered by AI concerns. Turning quickly to the question you kicked off with, I certainly think the U.S. economy is going to do well next year. There's a fair amount of fiscal stimulus in the works. The trillion-dollar question is who'll get the bulk of the benefits, and that's not quite as clear.
Cameron, morning. The big question here in India as we wind down this year is, of course, whether foreigners are going to make a comeback. Are you sensing that in flows and the weekly data that you track, both global emerging market funds and other kinds?
I'm afraid not at the moment. What I'm seeing certainly towards emerging markets is a rather arbitrary distinction between countries that investors think will ride the early stages of the artificial intelligence boom and all the rest, though Latin America has been getting a little bit of a pass recently because they have big reserves of things like copper and lithium, which are needed to sort of make the infrastructure reality. So, there's been India has been somewhat bypassed. Flows have primarily gone to funds dedicated to China, Korea, and Taiwan, and then Brazil and Chile as resource plays.
Okay, Cameron, what about, the flows? Basically, we obviously here in India would like the FIs to come back after the kind of selling that they've seen. But between, emerging markets and developed markets, how do you see, flows pan out? Because one side of the market is talking about the US markets being a little overhyped, being expensive and entering into a bubble terrain. But they continue to chug along. So how do you see flows moving between developed markets and emerging markets?
Well, at the moment, certainly in relative terms, it's been fairly equal. In raw dollar terms, it still favors developed markets just because they are developed. So investors are certainly starting to hedge their bets a bit. But we've started to see flows return to the diversified global emerging markets funds, which is usually a first step when sentiment towards emerging markets is rallying. But of course, there's very little of 2025 left, so a certain amount of the flows for the next few weeks will be tactical and end of year. I think the bigger bets will start to come in the first month of 2026.
Yeah, if there's any reversal at all. But sometimes you never know. December can surprise, and it can really have more activity than you imagine. But Cameron, quickly to go back to your earlier point, right? It's South Korea, Japan, China. These markets have stolen India's thunder completely in 2025. We were joking about it the other day that can India be the anti-AI trade? When South Korea is down 4%, you want to have a little bit in India. So are you seeing any evidence of a shift away from these three markets specifically, China, South Korea, and Japan?
Korea has certainly emerged from the pack in the past month or so. In addition to an AI story, it also offers a bit of a reform one at the moment. But I would agree with your point that if a couple of things happens, India will be well positioned. One is that the AI story implodes completely. I don't actually see that happening, but India remains the preeminent defensive play within the emerging markets universe. And secondly, something like AI has two stages. There's the stage where everyone wants to buy the picks and shovels to dig the mine, and then there's the stage where you operate the mine and dispose of the products. And India, I think, is quite well positioned when AI becomes, as people hope, a sort of an established part of the sort of general economic puzzle. India has good history of sort of harnessing established business processes. The success of its back office industry being a good case in point. But that, I think, is next year's story. I think for the rest of the year, it'll just bump along somewhat in the channels we've seen recently.
All right, Cameron, we'll leave it there. Good speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us, and really appreciate your time here on CNBC.
Not at all.
Thank you.